How does someone who avoids the spotlight become the center of attention? At the 2025 presidential inauguration, Barron Trump did just that. Always private, his composed presence sparked speculation. Would he step into public life or remain in the background? Was his appearance just symbolic, or did it signal something more? Could this be the start of a new role in the Trump legacy? Let's get into details. The 2025 presidential inauguration was an event that captured global attention, marking the return of Donald Trump to the White House as the 47th President of the United States. His second inauguration was historically significant, as he became one of the few American presidents to serve non-consecutive terms, a feat last accomplished by Grover Cleveland in the late 19th century. Supporters hailed it as a political comeback, while critics viewed it as a controversial return to power. No matter the stance, there was no denying the significance of the day. However, amid the formalities and celebrations, one figure unexpectedly drew public attention in a way that few had anticipated. Standing beside his father was Barron Trump, the youngest of Donald and Melania Trump's children. Over the years, Barron had been one of the most private members of the Trump family. Unlike his older siblings, Ivanka, Donald Jr., and Eric, who were deeply involved in their father's business and political affairs, Barron had remained largely out of the spotlight. While the public had occasionally seen him at official events and family gatherings, he had never played a vocal role in his father's political career. His presence at the inauguration, while expected as a member of the first family, had an air of intrigue. The world had watched him grow over the years, yet very little was known about him beyond his formal appearances. The 20th of January, 2025 was a cold day in Washington, D.C. Weather forecasts had warned of potential disruptions due to low temperatures and the possibility of snowfall. In response, officials made a rare decision to move the ceremony indoors to the U.S. Capitol Rotunda, rather than hold it on the traditional west front of the Capitol. This shift in location allowed the event to proceed smoothly, without concerns about harsh weather conditions affecting attendees or disrupting the broadcast, watched by millions around the world. The change was met with mixed reactions, as some believed it took away from the grandeur of the outdoor setting, while others appreciated the practicality of the decision. Inside the rotunda, the anticipation was palpable. Political leaders, dignitaries, and guests filled the space, waiting for the official swearing-in to begin. Supporters gathered outside, braving the cold, waving flags and chanting in support of Trump's return. As the clock struck 12 noon, Chief Justice John Roberts stepped forward to administer the oath of office. Donald Trump placed his hand on two Bibles, one a family heirloom, the other previously used by Abraham Lincoln. Standing beside him, Melania Trump held the sacred texts, her expression composed as she watched the moment unfold. Trump repeated the words of the oath with precision, his voice steady and deliberate. As he concluded the final phrase, the room erupted in applause. Outside, cheers rang through the streets, while onlookers watching from around the world reacted in real time. The ceremony had officially confirmed what had once seemed improbable: Trump was once again President of the United States. Following the oath, Trump delivered his inaugural address. His speech touched on themes familiar to his supporters: economic revival, national security, and a vision for restoring what he described as American strength on the world stage. He spoke of unfinished business from his first term, addressing policies that he planned to reinforce and issues he intended to resolve. His words were met with a mixture of enthusiasm and scrutiny, with supporters rallying behind his promises and critics dissecting his statements. The speech was a reflection of Trump's political style: bold, assertive, and filled with conviction. While the president commanded attention, the presence of his family did not go unnoticed. Over the years, the Trump children had played significant roles in shaping the family's public image. Ivanka Trump, a former White House advisor, had been an influential figure in her father's first administration. Donald Trump Jr., known for his outspoken political stance, remained a key advocate for his father's policies. Eric Trump, often managing the Trump Organization, was an essential figure in maintaining the family's business interests. But the youngest Trump, Barron, had always been different. Barron had been raised in a unique environment, first in New York City, attending the prestigious Columbia Grammar and Preparatory School, and later moving to Washington, D.C. when his father took office in 2016. Unlike his older siblings, he had experienced much of his childhood under the scrutiny of the public eye but had largely remained a private figure. His mother, Melania Trump, had emphasized keeping his life as normal as possible, shielding him from the political spotlight whenever possible. In the years following Trump's first presidency, Barron continued his education, enrolling at Oxbridge Academy, a private school in Florida. His limited public appearances further fueled speculation about his future. Would he follow in his father's footsteps and eventually enter the world of business or politics? Or would he carve out his own path, away from the public eye? These questions had lingered for years, but Barron himself had never spoken on the matter. As the official proceedings of the inauguration concluded, the evening shifted into a celebratory mode. The Commander-in-Chief Ball, one of the most prestigious events of the night, was held in honor of the military. It was a grand affair attended by service members, veterans, and distinguished guests. Trump and Melania Trump made their entrance, engaging in brief conversations and sharing moments with attendees. As part of tradition, the newly sworn-in President and First Lady took to the dance floor for the inaugural dance, a symbolic gesture marking the beginning of their new term in office. Another high-profile event of the night was the Liberty Ball, held at the National Building Museum. The venue was filled with dignitaries, celebrities, and prominent political figures. The air was lively, with performances from notable musicians and speeches from key figures celebrating the start of the new administration. Throughout the night, discussions revolved around the significance of the day and what Trump's second term might bring. Amid the celebrations, many could not help but take note of Barron Trump's presence. He was no longer the child seen during his father's first term. He was now an adult, standing quietly, yet noticeably, among some of the most powerful figures in the country. Observers speculated about his future and whether he would eventually step into a more public role. His reserved nature only fueled curiosity. Though Barron had yet to make any formal statements or take on any public responsibilities, his presence alone became a topic of conversation. Political analysts, commentators, and media outlets speculated on what role, if any, he would choose in the coming years. Some believed he would continue to stay out of the public eye, focusing on his education and personal interests. Others wondered if he would at some point step forward and play a larger part in the Trump legacy. As the night progressed and the inaugural events unfolded, one thing became clear. Barron Trump, despite his reserved demeanor, had become a figure of intrigue. His future remained uncertain, but his presence at one of the most significant political events of the decade had not gone unnoticed. While his father embarked on a second term in office, the world watched, waiting to see what path Barron Trump would choose to take. As the night of the inauguration progressed, discussions surrounding Donald Trump's second term dominated political circles, but another topic had begun to emerge in quiet conversations. Barron Trump, despite not having taken the stage in any formal capacity, had drawn unexpected attention. Unlike his father and older siblings who were accustomed to the political and media spotlight, Barron had maintained a life largely out of public view. Yet his presence at such a significant event made people take notice, particularly given how much he had grown and changed since the last time the nation had seen him during his father's first term in office. Barron had always been a figure of curiosity, not because of anything he had done, but rather because of what he had chosen not to do. He had never been one to speak publicly, never involved himself in his father's campaigns, and had largely avoided the controversies and headlines that often followed the Trump family. His life had been distinctly different from that of his older siblings. While Ivanka, Donald Jr., and Eric had been actively engaged in their father's political career, giving speeches, appearing at rallies, and taking on roles within the Trump organization, Barron had remained largely uninvolved. This was, in part, due to his age. He was still a child when his father first took office, but also due to the influence of his mother, Melania Trump. Melania had always been fiercely protective of Barron's privacy. Unlike other first ladies who had engaged in a wide range of initiatives and frequently appeared in the media, Melania had made it clear that her priority was her son. She often spoke about wanting to give him as normal a childhood as possible despite the unusual circumstances of growing up in the White House. While the world debated politics and policies, She ensured that Barron's routine was structured around his education, personal interests, and development, away from the pressures of public scrutiny. During his father's first term, Barron had been enrolled at Columbia Grammar and Preparatory School in New York City, where he had a relatively traditional academic experience despite the constant security presence that came with being the son of the president. When the Trump family relocated to Washington, D.C., he continued his education at St. Andrew's Episcopal School in Maryland, a choice that was carefully considered to align with Melania's desire to keep him grounded. Unlike his older siblings, Barron did not attend the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania, the alma mater of both his father and his brother, Donald Jr. Instead, his academic path had been carefully curated to focus on his individual strengths and aspirations. In the years following Trump's departure from the White House in 2021, Barron had continued to stay out of the public eye, focusing on his education. He eventually attended Oxbridge Academy, a private school in Florida, known for its emphasis on academics and leadership. While his father remained in the political spotlight, making frequent appearances and engaging with the media, Barron maintained his preference for privacy. This only fueled further speculation about what role, if any, he might play in the future. Now, at 18 years old, Barron was no longer a child. He was a young adult, capable of making his own decisions about his level of public involvement. This raised an interesting question. Would he follow in his family's footsteps and take on a more visible role, or would he continue to maintain the distance that had defined much of his life so far? The speculation surrounding Barron's future was not new, but it had gained momentum in the wake of his father's second inauguration. While some dismissed the idea that he would ever step into politics, others pointed out that many prominent figures in American history had initially stayed out of the public eye, only to later emerge as key players in national affairs. His background, his education, and his upbringing all suggested that he had been exposed to the workings of politics and business from a young age. Whether or not he would choose to engage with them was another matter entirely. Despite his lack of political involvement, Barron had inevitably been shaped by his father's presidency. He had spent years observing the dynamics of power, witnessing both the unwavering support from Trump's base and the relentless criticism from his opponents. He had seen how the media scrutinized every move his family made, how narratives were shaped and reshaped by political commentators, and how public perception could shift in an instant. These were experiences that few people his age could relate to, yet they were a fundamental part of his reality. His demeanor during the inauguration only added to the curiosity surrounding him. He carried himself with confidence, standing alongside his family with a composed presence that had not gone unnoticed. He did not seek attention, yet it found him. Unlike his older siblings, who often thrived in front of cameras and microphones, Barron's quiet nature only made him more intriguing to those watching. At the inaugural celebrations that followed the official swearing-in ceremony, guests continued to discuss the significance of the day, but within those conversations, Barron's name continued to surface. Those who had never paid much attention to him before were now wondering whether he might eventually take on a larger role in the Trump family's legacy. Others speculated that he might choose an entirely different path, one that had nothing to do with politics. As the night went on, discussions about Barron extended beyond just those in attendance. Social media platforms were flooded with posts analyzing his presence at the event. Some users noted how much he had grown, comparing recent images to those from his father's first presidency. Others speculated about his personality, drawing conclusions based on his reserved nature and lack of public statements. News outlets ran segments discussing his potential future, interviewing analysts who debated whether he might one day step into the world of politics, business, or something entirely unexpected. The sudden focus on Barron was not something he had sought out, yet it was now a reality he had to navigate. Unlike other 18-year-olds who could transition into adulthood without public scrutiny, Barron's every move would be watched, analyzed, and interpreted through the lens of his family's influence. Whether he wanted that attention or not was irrelevant. He was already a subject of national interest. Yet despite all the speculation, one fact remained unchanged. Barron Trump had never publicly stated any interest in politics. He had not given interviews discussing his views, nor had he made any moves to suggest he would step into the political arena. While many were eager to place expectations on him, he had never indicated that he intended to follow in his father's footsteps. This was an important distinction to make. Just because he was the son of a former and now current president did not necessarily mean that he would adopt the same ambitions. As the inaugural events continued, Barron remained composed, engaging only when necessary and keeping a quiet presence. The night was about his father, about the political direction of the country, and about the supporters who had once again propelled Trump into office. Yet, whether he intended to or not, Barron had become a point of discussion, his future now a topic of speculation. What path he would choose remained to be seen, but for now he remained as he had always been, an observer in a world that had already decided he was someone worth watching. As the celebrations of the inauguration continued, the discussions about Barron Trump did not fade. If anything, the curiosity surrounding him only deepened. Political analysts, media outlets, and social commentators dissected his appearance at the event, speculating about what it meant for his future. Despite having said nothing publicly, his presence alone was enough to fuel conversations across the country. Some saw him as a young man simply fulfilling his role as the son of a president, while others viewed his poised demeanor as a sign of something more. Whether intentional or not, Barron had become one of the most talked-about figures of the night. Unlike his father and older siblings, Barron had never embraced the public eye. His decision, or perhaps the decision made for him to remain out of the political limelight, had only heightened interest in him over the years. Now at 18, he was at a turning point where he could decide the level of involvement he wanted in the public sphere. The fact that he had not spoken publicly at the inauguration did not lessen the intrigue. In fact, it only amplified it. People were left wondering whether his silence was a choice of preference or strategy. As social media continued to analyze his every movement, older footage of Barron resurfaced. Clips of him as a child during Trump's first term circulated online, with people commenting on how much he had changed. Images from past inaugurations were compared to the present one, highlighting the stark difference between the quiet boy who had once stood beside his father and the composed young man seen at this historic event. News articles examined his upbringing, revisiting how Melania Trump had worked to ensure he had as normal a childhood as possible, despite the unavoidable media attention that came with being part of the Trump family. One recurring question in the discussion surrounding Barron was whether he would ever take on a political role. Many pointed out that his older siblings had actively campaigned for their father, attended rallies, and participated in public debates. Barron, on the other hand, had never been involved in any of these activities. There was no record of him making political statements, no history of him engaging in public discourse, and no indication that he had an interest in stepping into the political world. Yet despite this, speculation about his future persisted. Comparisons were drawn to other children of presidents who had eventually found themselves involved in politics. Some referenced the Bush family, where George W. Bush followed in the footsteps of his father, George H.W. Bush, to become president. Others pointed to the Kennedy family, where multiple generations entered public service. But Barron's situation was different. While many political families raised their children with the expectation of continuing a legacy, there was no clear evidence that this was the case for him. A key aspect that made Barron's future unpredictable was his mother's influence. Melania had always emphasized that she wanted Barron to have a life separate from politics. She had been vocal about ensuring his education and well-being came first, keeping him away from the chaos that often surrounded his father's presidency. Those close to her noted that she had a strong presence in his life and had worked diligently to shield him from the pressures that came with being a Trump. It was widely believed that if Barron were to enter the public sphere, it would be a decision he made on his own, not one influenced by expectations from his family. Meanwhile, the Trump family remained focused on the start of Donald Trump's second term. With discussions shifting toward policy changes and the direction of the administration, Barron's name still lingered in media coverage. Even among those who had little interest in politics, there was a fascination with the youngest Trump. His towering height, his quiet demeanor, and his reserved expressions all played a role in shaping the intrigue around him. People speculated about his personality, debated whether he was interested in the world of business like his father, and questioned if he would eventually make a public statement about his own ambitions. Despite all the talk, Barron himself remained silent. He did not address the speculation, nor did he acknowledge the growing discussions about him. Unlike his father, who was known for his direct engagement with the media, Barron had no public presence on social platforms. This made him even more difficult to decipher. There were no interviews, no tweets, and no press releases that could give insight into his thoughts. In an era where public figures often shape their own narratives through social media, Barron's lack of presence made him an enigma. Some speculated that his silence was intentional, a way to keep his private life separate from his father's presidency. Others believed that he simply preferred a life away from politics. Those who had followed his growth over the years noted that he had always seemed more interested in personal development than public appearances. Even during Trump's first term, when media coverage of the family was at its peak, Barron had only been seen occasionally and never in a speaking role. His avoidance of the spotlight was not new, yet the fascination with him had never faded. At the inaugural events, guests continued to speculate about what Barron's presence meant. Some assumed he would eventually take a step forward and speak publicly, while others believed he would remain on the sidelines observing rather than participating. The lack of clarity made for endless discussions, with no definitive answer in sight. While much of the focus remained on the political future of the nation, the interest in Barron persisted. Reporters covering the inauguration event noted how frequently his name came up in conversations, often as a side discussion to the main political events. Even those who were not deeply invested in the Trump administration found themselves intrigued by Barron's presence. The fact that he had never actively sought attention made the curiosity around him even stronger. As the night progressed, Barron continued to carry himself with the same quiet demeanor that had defined him for years. He was present, yet distant, engaged but reserved. Unlike his siblings, who had been comfortable in front of cameras and at public events, Barron's presence at the inauguration raised more questions than answers. The growing discussions about him showed no signs of slowing down, and whether he wanted it or not, he was now a figure of national interest. Even after the inauguration concluded and the administration began settling into its responsibilities, Barron's name did not fade from discussions. Some wondered if he would eventually give an interview, addressing the speculation about his future. Others believed he would continue to stay away from public discourse entirely, choosing a life outside the influence of politics. The possibilities were endless, and without direct confirmation from Barron himself, everything remained uncertain. For now, he remained as he had always been, an observer, standing at the intersection of history and personal choice. His next steps were unknown, but one thing was clear. Whether he spoke or remained silent, whether he chose to follow in his father's path or forge his own, the world was watching. As the days following the inauguration unfolded, the focus gradually shifted toward the policies and direction of Donald Trump's second term. Discussions regarding executive orders, cabinet appointments, and legislative priorities dominated the headlines. Yet, amid the political discourse, one topic refused to fade: Barron Trump. The curiosity surrounding him had not subsided. If anything, it had grown stronger. His presence at the inauguration had sparked endless conversations, with analysts and the public alike speculating about what, if anything, his role in the future would be. For years, Barron had remained a figure of intrigue, largely due to his ability to stay out of the political spotlight. Unlike his older siblings, who had taken on active roles in both the Trump Organization and their father's campaigns, Barron had never publicly expressed any interest in politics or business. His life had been deliberately structured to ensure that he had a sense of normalcy, a goal that his mother, Melania Trump, had always prioritized. She had made it clear from the very beginning of Trump's political career that her son's privacy was of utmost importance. While his father commanded attention on television screens and social media, Barron's absence from public discourse made him an anomaly in a family known for its outspoken nature. He had never been part of political rallies, had never been interviewed about his father's presidency, and had never spoken publicly at any major event. This absence of public presence only fueled speculation about his future. especially now that he was an adult with the ability to make his own decisions about whether to remain in the background or step into a more visible role. One of the most striking aspects of Barron's life was how little was truly known about his personal aspirations. Despite being the son of one of the most famous political figures in modern history, there was no official statement or documented plan outlining his future. While it was well known that he had attended Oxbridge Academy in Florida, there had been no public announcements about whether he intended to pursue higher education, business, or any other field. Unlike his siblings, who had each followed a well-defined career path, Barron's choices remained entirely speculative. Many found themselves wondering whether he would eventually take on a more prominent role in the Trump legacy. Historically, children of presidents had often been expected to continue their family's public influence, whether through business, politics, or activism. The Bush family, the Kennedy family, and even the Roosevelt family had all produced multiple generations of political figures. However, Barron's lack of public engagement suggested that he might not follow in the same footsteps. While some argued that he could choose to embrace a more public-facing role in the years to come, others believed that his path would be entirely different. The possibility of him staying completely out of politics and pursuing a career in a private industry was just as likely. Some speculated that given his upbringing and exposure to international cultures through his mother's Slovenian heritage, he might choose to focus on global affairs, business, or even philanthropy. Yet, without any indication from Barron himself, all of this remained nothing more than speculation. Even as the media continued to analyze his potential trajectory, Barron himself remained silent. He did not make any statements, nor did he engage with the ongoing conversations about him. Unlike his father, who had built an entire political persona around direct engagement with the media, Barron's approach was entirely different. His absence from social media only reinforced the idea that he had no desire to shape his public image in the way his father and siblings had. Despite his silence, his influence was still felt. He had managed to captivate public interest without saying a single word. The discussions about him were not necessarily about what he had done, but rather about what he might do. This kind of intrigue was rare, especially in an age where public figures often relied on direct engagement with their audience. Yet Barron had done the opposite. By staying in the background, he had become even more of a mystery. The weeks following the inauguration only intensified the speculation. Some political analysts suggested that if Barron ever chose to enter the public sphere, he would likely take a different approach than his father and older siblings. Rather than using direct media appearances and social media presence to build a following, he might choose a more strategic, behind-the-scenes role. Others believed that he could remain entirely outside of politics, using his family's vast business empire to build his own legacy separate from the political world. As time passed, the question of Barron's future remained unanswered. His name continued to be mentioned in articles, discussions, and news segments, yet no concrete information ever emerged. This led to a unique phenomenon. While the rest of the Trump family was actively involved in shaping their public image, Barron's was shaped entirely by speculation. One factor that added to the uncertainty was his mother's continued dedication to his privacy. Melania Trump had always been a quiet force in the Trump family, carefully selecting the moments in which she engaged with the public. She had made it clear during her time as First Lady that her focus was on her son's well-being and education, and she had never publicly indicated that she wanted him to be involved in politics. Many believed that as long as she had influence over his decisions, Barron would continue to stay out of the public eye. Yet, despite all the efforts to keep him private, Barron remained a subject of public interest. People were naturally drawn to figures who held an air of mystery, and he was no exception. His quiet demeanor, his reserved presence at major events, and his avoidance of the spotlight only made people more curious about what he might choose to do next. As discussions about his future continued, the reality remained unchanged. There was no definitive answer about what path he would take. Whether he would eventually step forward and take a role within the Trump family's political and business empire, or whether he would continue to maintain his privacy was entirely up to him. For now, he remained as he had always been, a quiet observer, standing in the background of one of the most politically influential families in modern history. In many ways, the attention on Barron reflected a larger fascination with the children of presidents. Throughout history, the public had always been interested in what they would go on to do, whether they chose to embrace a political legacy or carve out their own paths. While some had taken on active roles in government, others had chosen completely different careers, far removed from the world of politics. With Barron, the uncertainty surrounding his future only added to the intrigue. As the weeks turned into months, the discussions about Barron began to fade from the headlines, replaced by the day-to-day developments of the Trump administration's policies and political decisions. Yet, for those who had followed his story, the question of what he would do next remained. He had reached the age where he could begin making his own decisions about his future, but whether he would ever choose to share those decisions with the world was another matter entirely. For now, Barron Trump remained an unknown factor in a highly visible family. His choices, whatever they may be, would be his own to make. The world could speculate, discuss, and analyze, but until he decided to step forward, if he ever did, the mystery surrounding him would remain intact. With that, we have reached the end of today's video. If you have come this far with us, be sure to check out other videos on the channel.